Yeah, just wherever. Okay, everybody, welcome to the space. How many of you guys is first time in your space? Any first timers? Veteran crew for a veteran discussion. I love to hear that. Okay, obviously BIP110 debate here. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of chatter, a lot of propaganda. You could argue on this subject. So we're going to try to formalize this discussion a little bit. My role will be moderator in doing such. A couple important things to remember here, ground rules. First and foremost, I'm a finance bro. If I say something stupid, the polite thing is to ignore it and never bring it up again to protect my ego. On the actual debate style here, so each team will have 4 minutes for their opening statement. Team 1 gets to introduce a topic. Team 2 will get a rebuttal. We'll try to keep these about 5 minutes. Additional cross-examinations will be allowed by me. After formal case, close of the topic, Team 2 will then propose a topic, and we'll repeat the same process over and over again. If we get off topic, I will interrupt a speaker to try to keep it on track and confine to a particular topic. I will make a note so we can bring up the topic again and circle back to it so it doesn't get lost. No audience interruptions, please. We will have a formal Q&A. We have a lot of time reserved to that. We understand it's a technical topic. There are a lot of things being discussed, so if you just save your questions to the end, we'll make sure to address them. And then last and final rule, if the notepad goes over my head, that means the moderator needs a beer. And so expect that to be expeditious. Thank you, Mark. And IPA, yeah, just IPA. With that being said, if you guys just want to quickly introduce yourselves and your stances on the matter, we'll get started here.
I'm Charlie, longtime Bitcoin lurker. My stance on the matter is I'm pretty much on the fence. I feel like I can argue both sides sometimes. So we'll see how this goes. But overall, just a huge fan of Bitcoin.
Great question. Joel, do we have different mics?
There's two there, but yeah, you can turn them on. Sorry, maybe
Hunter, do you want to reach over?
missing one, so he and I will just share, I guess.
Well, I'll share because I won't be talking too much.
Okay. My name's Matt, co-founder and CEO of Start9. This is the CTO. He'll introduce himself in a second. But on this, ultimately, I would like to see the fork succeed and activate. I do have, I hope, a nuanced and deep understanding of the situation. We have a very good vantage point as a company. I feel like we have certain views that many others do not, even though we have attempted to share some of those. And so hopefully we can add some flavor to the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm Aiden. I'm the CTO of Start9 Labs, as Matt mentioned. My position on the BIP itself is fairly neutral. I don't have a lot of strong feelings about whether or not it should succeed or not on a technical perspective, but I do have a lot of feelings about making sure that users have the ability to run the software that they want to run when they seem well informed about what the trade-offs are. And in our experience with interacting with users, that they do have that that knowledge. So yeah, I would just say pro users running the implementation they think they want to.
My name's Hunter. I'm CEO of Surmount Systems, and I have been working on protocols for Bitcoin for about 5 years in a serious way, full time. And so various layer protocols and author BIP360, and also written other BIPs as well, and read lots of them. And I actually built I compiled into a Git repository that I just pushed before I came here, a big book of BIPs. And so if you want every BIP in a PDF, it's about 1,200 pages long. All 210 BIPs currently managed by a Nix flake. that's available now on my GitHub, and if you want to kind of follow along, worth reading 110. Where I've been historically on that issue, and also 360. Where I stand on 110 is I was there, when BIP444 was published. I was there even before when there were a lot of acrimonious debates around relay policy and raising the data carrier size on nodes. In a way, 444/110 was a direct response to the criticism around relay policy not really doing much or being very effective at reducing data on the network. And there's other things, various things we can dive into there. But generally speaking, I've been involved in Bitcoin engineering and protocol development in a very serious way for about 5 years now.
Thank you, gentlemen. Charlie, you'll be on the clock. Please explain your opening statement.
I think that Bitcoin 110 and a lot of the folks around it have done a really good job, but I don't know if their campaign has been enough and if they've done enough kind of marketing, or I would say distribution, to educate enough folks to be successful yet. So I think that's, yeah.
Excellent. We'll go team 2, opening statement.
Well, the BIP110 soft fork, as Hunter mentioned, is a consequence of the failure of diplomacy around the policy debate. The policy debate was never satisfactorily resolved. To this day, I do not fully understand myself why it was not, because both sides of that debate were fairly convinced that the facts supported them. When you have two opposing groups of rational people disagreeing on facts, that tends to be a absence of information problem, or someone is lying problem. And both sides concluded the latter. They both concluded that the other side was acting in bad faith, rather than there just being some sort of collective misunderstanding about how policy and Bitcoin works. And so I predicted that a failure of that debate would dovetail into a soft fork. A lot of people assumed that my predicting that was me advocating for that. It was not. I do my best to observe and predict. Maybe I do more speculating than I should, but I enjoy the process. I think it's interesting, and I see no harm in it so long as everyone is interacting in a respectful manner and viewing these predictions or speculations as sort of thought experiments and possible futures. But in the tribalism that is social media, and in particular X, it's very, very difficult to engage in any kind of speculation or prediction without being accused of wholeheartedly kind of, viciously fighting for something. I'm fine with it. It's just not concise. It's nuanced, and there's a reason why people fought about policy for 8 months or more. It's because there's a lot of layers to it and a lot of nuance to it that I don't immediately want to jump into here, because I think ultimately this is about the BIP110 and the soft fork. And so yes, policy is going to infect this conversation, as I think it should to some degree, but I'll do my best to try to stay focused on where we're at right now. And where I think where we're at right now is you have an experiment to a degree. BIP110 is a little bit of an experiment in governance on Bitcoin, because there are different hypotheses about how Bitcoin works and how Bitcoin should work from a protocol upgrade and overall governance perspective. And there are obviously different opinions on this. There are some places where everyone agrees, and then some very acute and touchy places where everyone disagrees, and I think that's what we're going to get into tonight. And, as I mentioned, my real interest in this is twofold. One is that ultimately the BIP110 code changes, the actual changes to the protocol itself, are fairly small, non-impactful, depending on which side you're on, you could view them as benign, like they do nothing. And depending on, maybe from the other side, they have a, degree of impact on the capital investments of disliked entities in the space, and it's sort of a punch in the nose type of thing. But ultimately, the technical changes to the protocol are limited and temporary, and the changes that are made can be circumvented fairly trivially, which I think everyone, even the strongest proponents of BIP110, openly admit. And so it's a fairly benign, harmless soft fork at the end of the day. And so what it does ultimately, I think, the main point behind all of it, behind all of the declarations and the code is an attempt to reassert the network's willingness to fight spam. I think Bitcoin marks a line in the sand or a declaration of sorts that's like, okay, you can define spam, even though it originates as a subjective definition, right? You can have an emergent definition if enough people agree on the subjective definition, that there is such a thing as spam, and that we can and should do everything we can to fight it, because if we don't, Bitcoin devolves into a trash can of defilement and horrific material that eventually causes, governments to feel the need and gives them the sort of casus belli, the cause for war, to come in and really do some attacks. So that's kind of one, is it's a statement of, nope, you can define spam and we're here to fight it. And if it fails, I think that will falls with it. I don't know if there will remain a collective will to combat spam for the foreseeable future if BIP110 were to fail. So that's one reason I would like it to see it succeed. And the second one is because I believe that the world is moved forward by passionate minorities who go against the grain and are oftentimes correct, right? That the majority, so to speak, does not always get it right. And that I think it's really important, especially now that Bitcoin has outgrown its infancy, where a small group of people can just get together and agree. It's outgrown that. I don't know if we're ever going to see the majority agreement on anything ever again in Bitcoin. And so I think it's really important that minority movements that are extremely confident and adamant about getting their way, get their way, absent any meaningful resistance from the majority. I think that if a small group of people really want something, and everyone else is just like, we don't care about this, that they should probably get it, because it's the only way the protocol is going to move forward. If you are actively against something, you should actively resist something, and then it's great that it fails because there was equal and opposite force working against you. So I would like to see this succeed because I think it's a good governance model for Bitcoin. I think it would set an important precedent and mechanism by which soft forks can be activated without having to go around and get everyone's permission, because it's never going to happen again. You can just do things. You don't need to ask permission. You can beg forgiveness. It's not who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. I think these are really important adages in our world if you want to see things progress. And so I think it's right in this case that BIP110 should succeed, because there has not emerged an active resistance. There has emerged a passive resistance.
Thank you, Matt. Aiden?
Are we all giving individual statements?
Yeah, I may have said too much. I don't know.
It was beautiful, though. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's actually not clear to me who exactly is on what specific side here, but yeah, I'll go ahead and I guess try to summarize my position here. Honestly, again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of my concerns about what's happening right now have very little to do with the BIP itself. As Matt mentioned here, is like the actual code changes don't really matter that much. They're not going to do much. Like spam will continue to find its way to exist under these circumstances. But also, like, from a technical perspective, I have no reason to be against it either. There's no reason to have op returns over more than 83 bytes because, there's no reason to have a hash longer than 83 bytes. And if you can put a hash in the chain, then you can store the data elsewhere and people can get it. Like, Bitcoin was never and should never be a place for storing data. It is a place for establishing consensus, and that can always be done with a hash. Anyway, a big thing that I've sort of seen in this movement, and as Matt's also alluding to here, is that like it is a big deal from the perspective of how the Bitcoin community is reacting to a contentious soft fork that isn't being pushed by Bitcoin Core, right? And, now, especially now that there's a lot more inertia in Bitcoin. What we're seeing right now is a very, passionate and meaningful UASF movement, no meaningful URSF movement, and then a lot of people on Twitter who are against BIP110 who are just complaining about it, but basically having the perspective that the network will just deal with these people, that like they will fork themselves off and we are better for it. And that's the main thing that I disagree with. I don't think that we are better off if a meaningful section of the Bitcoin network, a group of very passionate, plebs as they self-describe themselves as, forks themselves off the network. I think that we are stronger together, and that if we sort of took a moment to, even if it wasn't BIP110 itself, if we took a moment to like try to address the real concerns that these users have about spam and about like, okay, how are we going to sit down as a community, as Bitcoin, as the Bitcoin network to try to address this problem? And the large, a very large group of people have been like, well, we just don't care about these people or their concerns. We're going to ignore them. And I think that's a problem. The other thing that I would like to get into at some point is also how woefully underprepared the network is for a contentious soft fork in general. From a technological perspective, wallet providers and Lightning implementations have absolutely no clean way to allow users to not choose a side. And like a lot of people will pretend that the not choosing a side is to just run the legacy implementation and it will, it'll just switch to whatever the longest chain is. But that doesn't acknowledge the fact that there could be deep reorg risk, that there could be a soft fork chain that does not have a ton of hash power at first, but then catches up later. A lot of people could be in trouble. And we need, for example, wallet implementations that could connect to multiple address indexing providers and require that transactions be confirmed on both of them. You could also require, you also need infrastructure for Lightning nodes, for example, to be able to watch a second node instance in order to provide justice transactions if somebody tries to broadcast an old state on a network you're not following, on a chain you are not following. Just from a technological perspective, we just do not have a good way for people to keep their coins safe when they don't know what chain is going to win.
Or when they're not technical enough to roll their own solutions.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Aiden. Hunter?
Well, I think that was well said. In some ways, I do want to kind of acknowledge a bit of a contradiction where you said that, the network isn't really well prepared for the inevitability of a deep reorgs and a contentious fork. It sort of contradicts something Matt said about the soft fork being benign. And in a way, it's sort of, it's a complex argument, but it is a contradiction. And so when you sense a contradiction, you have to check your premises. And you have to question every assumption that led you to that point, and from first principles. And so it's important to remember Bitcoin, its basis is really more reflective of observations made of nature as emergent properties of mathematics and cryptography that is applied in a sort of uniquely extrajudicial manner for trustless and permissionless value settlement. And it's important, I think, to remember the three pillars of Bitcoin as sort of illustrated on that chart over there. It's one of my favorite pieces of work from Fractal Encrypt. On the lower right, there's the three pillars of Bitcoin: technical, social, and financial. And it's important, I think, to remember sort of our first principles and our shared common values whenever we enter a debate of this kind. And so we have to be, or question, a conjecture, whatever you want to call it. But it is an unresolved, unproven point that we're about to prove in real time quite soon. And you have to really study the BIP110 in particular. It's unique. It's uniquely written in the way it was written. And the way, there's a number of really interesting, unique aspects of it, but when Lynn Alden famously called it a Motte and Bailey, it kind of is. It's written in a deliberately adversarial way because it's a reflection of the fact that, from my estimation, Core has been rather negligent in addressing a very serious open vulnerability on the network that I call PBAs, or poison block attacks, that were essentially demonstrated live in front of everyone a year ago, over a year ago now, at the 2025 April Op Next, and I think that was in Boston. And Portland Hoddle essentially demonstrated that he could make a dual Xeon Gold system from maybe 2014, but it's still server-grade hardware, sort of lock up both RPC and P2P gossip the node for 25 minutes based on a reg test attack he demonstrated in front of everyone. And so I've tried to independently replicate this attack, but I will say I wasn't able to essentially understand deeply the how to replicate quadratic signature verification. And so I haven't been able to independently, from just purely public information, replicate the attack that Portland discusses. And as a consequence, I'm reluctant to sort of speak too deeply on how that works. However, it is mentioned in BIP110. It is actually the only BIP that explicitly mentions PBAs and its intention to address the problem. I don't think it's efficient against every class of a PBA. There are different classes of PBAs that work through, there's a couple different dimensions. So there's the grandfathering mechanism of 110, there's the sort of legacy SIGOPS, and I mean, it's very technical, but there's PBAs that can comply with a certain level of relay policy as a NOTS node, or a core node, core 31 would essentially manage its mempool, the transactions in its mempool, and how it sort of evicts transactions that do not comply with the rule set. There's the mempool aspect. There's also the max theoretic consensus valid transaction. That it's two stages. You have probably about 5 or 6 blocks of poison, legacy SIGOPS, script pub keys, and then you consolidate all the poison in a single transaction, and you're leveraging the fact that I think it's BIP110 pay to script hash. Legacy SIGOPS accounting is done in advance, ahead of time, and not after the fact, as it's usually done. Like when you go and consolidate all your SIGOPS and then you go to spend them, your node will account for them in a way that would essentially protect the node from the attack, should there be enough rules in place to prevent them. So there's BIP54 and BIP110. They both kind of are mentioned along with the PBAs, and there's a lot of discussion on the mailing list about that. But to me, it's all just a bunch of yap. Unless you can prove it, unless you can demonstrate it, then that's a different story. But it's important to remember that 110 was deliberately written in a deliberately adversarial nature, a Motte and Bailey sort of rhetorical technique that sort of expresses a Bailey, which is a sort of a distraction, a thing to get you, interested or talking. And then there's the Mott, which is the more defensible position. The Bailey, in this case, is arbitrary data, what people call spam. Spam, it sucks for part of Bitcoin's story to be that, there's definitely links to also probably also CP now. And to run a full archived node, you need a couple terabytes of SSD, and also just kind of you have to download CP as part of that process, and that's just something you have to accept. I mean, it's kind of shitty in a way, but then there's also the concern around censorship, right? And is making it harder to embed arbitrary data censorship? Well, is preventing DDoS censorship? What counts as censorship, right? Let's be specific and find useful common vocabulary in the very least. There's many.
I'll stop you there for the opening statements here. And Aiden, to your point, as currently constructed, now that we move into specific topics mentioned with rebuttals, as currently constructed, we have Charlie representing the agains, and you three representing the for. You now have the opportunity to publicly state which side you would like to represent or change teams. We'll give you the opportunity here right now.
So, yeah, I think having it balanced is a good idea, even if it's not what you personally are going to go campaign for afterwards.
Excellent. So Charlie, being the minority here, will allow you to present the first topic, and then we'll get a rebuttal from the other side.
You wanted to talk about policy. Oh, policy. We could start where it started.
I think policy's not as different as it was during the first UASF. It's definitely fair to say that the ecosystem's grown. We have all these economic actors. You've got Sailor, but when it comes down to the core of the problem that a BIP is solving, in 2015, 16, everyone's energy was scaling's an issue. And I think right now there's a disagreement around, the word spam, and I like how you said that's subjective and all that stuff. But with this BIP specifically, it's written in a way that will take down features that exist today. So it's not like we're all rumbling around scalability is so serious. It's more of just it's actually a sunset feature. It's going to take things away that certain businesses and things have built upon. Not that I personally agree with those businesses. So I just think it's a lot more nuanced. And the government part of it, you would know better than me, but the government piece of this being such a big topic when talking about 110, from my perspective, came a little bit later. Once the mining support wasn't as much, so it's we kind of turned. So, when Trump won in 16 and the left was kind of well, it was Russia. It's we don't want to be sore losers either. So, I don't know. Yeah.
So, Bitcoin is an infant, okay? It has not been around for very long. For those of us who have stressed through it for years, it feels like an eternity. But from a historic perspective, this is just the beginning. And it is in these times when any system or community figures out how to govern itself. We are still trying to figure out how to enact protocol changes in Bitcoin. There's been a few different trials, right? One of the biggest ones that comes to mind, obviously, is the block size war and the eventual, we'll call it victory of, the SegWit versus the SegWit 2x versus the, Bitcoin Cash eventual hard fork. And there were some lessons learned there. And even today, we're debating about what those lessons were. And so scaling, it turns out, wasn't an imminent problem. Very few people are still using Lightning today, and the blocks are empty, right? Scaling is going to be a problem. We are projecting tomorrow's problems into the present, which is fine, but to apply urgency and panic to them is not correct, right? There was no urgency in 2017 to scale. However, the foresight led us to implement SegWit, which enabled Lightning in a meaningful way, which now gives us the opportunity to scale in a way that we all roughly agree on, even though Lightning itself has challenges and not everyone is convinced that it alone is the solution. There are other solutions, many in fact, that are in the works. And so I think the scaling problem, at least to the medium future, has been solved. Obviously, there's still the how many UTXOs can exist and how are we going to get past that, but there's ideas floating around and that's fine. The most important thing that came out of that was us learning how to govern, was us learning what Bitcoin's nature was, what its political and economic and technical nature was. We're still trying to figure this thing out. Some people have better understandings of Bitcoin than others. I would argue nobody has a perfect understanding of it. I think everyone can agree with that statement. But the other truth of this is that it isn't finished yet. You can't understand something that is not done. And so I think one of the most important things here is the lessons around governance, right? Spam is not an imminent threat to Bitcoin. Some would argue that it is. I think spam can become a massive problem for Bitcoin if completely disregarded, right? If the conclusion of this entire saga is that there is no such thing as spam, and even if there was such thing as spam, you're not going to be able, who gets to decide what it is? And even if you could decide what it is, you can't stop it anyway. And if you try to stop it, you're going to end up self-harming. If that's the conclusion of all of this, I think it's bad for Bitcoin, okay? I think spam can be defined in an emergent way. I think it is a serious problem if left totally unmitigated, especially when the people who might do the spamming have a money printer and could just literally attack the network with it. But more important than that, actually, is how it gets resolved. And I want to see a future where, let me prep one more preface here and then I'll get to the final point. It is generally accepted at this point, not only generally accepted, there is no alternative way to change Bitcoin's consensus rules, to change the protocol without a soft fork. That is how you change the protocol, right? That's not like just one method, whatever. A hard fork also changes it, but it's also gonna, in almost any circumstance other than a zero-day vulnerability in which everyone agrees, this sort of fantasy that, there's some open, acknowledged attack and everyone agrees exactly how to mitigate the attack and decides to hard fork all at the same moment, right? That is the one exception to the statement I just made, that is the way that you change consensus in Bitcoin and remain Bitcoin is a soft fork. That's it. It seems insanely beautiful to me that the way that you prevent a change in Bitcoin, that you resist a change in Bitcoin that is undesirable, is also a soft fork. This seems very symmetrical and beautiful to me, right? There's a bunch of people who want to change Bitcoin, doesn't matter how many of them they are, like they're passionate, they have a lot of economic weight on their side, maybe it's 50% of the people in Bitcoin, but they have no economic power, maybe it's one giant person with enormous economic power, whoever it is. Assuming they have enough power to get your attention, assuming they have enough power to make you view their movement as an attack and something that needs to be reckoned with, the proper way to defend yourself in fencing when somebody attacks you in a particular way is a very particular defense, right? For every toxin, there's an antidote. And so what I'm saying is that if somebody attempts to soft fork the network and you agree with it, it is so trivial to parry that attack with a counter fork that I think we should learn to do this. And I think that if we do not learn the counterattack to a fork is a URSF, right, a user-resisted soft fork, that there's going to come a soft fork in which we are completely unprepared to defend ourselves against it because we think we can just ignore it and it'll go away, right? Maybe the people are storming the castle this time and you just so happen to be lucky enough that you can just continue with your banquet and ignore them and make fun of them, and they don't happen to breach the gates. But it would be better if you knew how to shoot arrows at them. It'd be better if you knew how to defend yourself and not have to rely on this omnipotent miner cartel to come in and save you from this attack. The network should learn to defend itself from soft forks with soft forks, and that to me is what's at stake here. I think this is the ultimate soft fork to learn that lesson on because it's so benign, right? If there was ever a time when we'll call it, I don't want to say apathetic, but the abstaining majority, the majority of people who don't like this but are unwilling to actually parry it, the best time for that group to learn how to defend themselves is when a child punches you in the jaw. And that's what BIP110 is. It's temporary. It doesn't mess with anything in any meaningful way. It's a good time to learn how to defend ourselves. So I would like to see BIP110 succeed so that we can learn this lesson in governments, if nothing else.
Thank you, Matt. Charlie, do you have anything?
I mean, I think that's overall right. Another beautiful thing will be we'll talk about spam a lot more, right?
It won't go away.
Yeah.
The conversation won't go away.
Yeah.
But if BIP110 fails, I think it does.
Excellent. So we'll give it team 4 here, opportunity to propose another topic here.
Oh, I mean, could I speak to some of that too, if you don't mind?
On the policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to remember that there is a process for proposing changes to the network under BIP3 now. That is a sort of coordination mechanism built into protocol consensus, the Bitcoin improvement process, proposal process. There's also, on the topic of like a user-rejected soft fork, that is fair, but we have to kind of put that into the sort of the category of an option bool, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's not just like true or false. It's like some true or false or none. So essentially saying like, we don't know yet. And so that's going to be interesting to observe. I have a theory that whenever you go to propose a consensus level change to the protocol that makes it more defensible against attackers, you're essentially, and you go to seek to activate it, you're essentially within certain realm of reason, depending how serious the attack is, but you're basically inviting people to demonstrate that attack, and then essentially it gives a game theoretic advantage to the people proposing that soft fork. Now, you could argue, you know, maybe 110 isn't sufficiently parsimonious for protecting against or defending against PBAs. Fair enough. I can think of more parsimonious ways to solve the problem in the ways that I can imagine the attack working. For sure, I get that. Also, you know, do we have enough time? I really wish we had more time to develop a better, more parsimonious solution, and also just work towards agreeing that this is something we should solve. This being structured data attacks, not just arbitrary data attacks, which I don't know if is really could be considered an attack, except for maybe in the legalistic sense where, you know, we get into the question of censorship and see whatever, you know, so objectionable material on chain. And so, I mean, that's something to consider. But it's not, to me, I think the more defensible position is that 110 helps to some extent against the problem of quadratic signature verification attacks that dramatically lock up the node and make the chain less defensible, and the more defensible fork that sort of rejects such a transaction at a policy, not just a policy, but a consensus level, that then essentially gives an advantage to anyone proving that the change was necessary. And I think, by the way, that's probably going to be how Bitcoin protocol consensus will be done in the future to some extent. But I'm actually going to be presenting more on that next month. Size in terms of, so you're essentially leveraging 10,000 byte script hub keys, multiple transactions at a time. So far as I've been, by the way, again, here's the other thing. I think you were late to when I basically explained, like, I didn't want to speak too much to the specifics of the PBA because I've been unable to replicate it locally. And so, despite it being demonstrated at Up Next in 2025 by Portland Huddle. So, I have a certain sense for what that could be, but I haven't been able to replicate it. Well,
Yeah, and I'll cut it there because we will be talking about PBA as a potentially other topic, and we'll have plenty of time for audience questions at the end. Aiden, do you have any thoughts, comments, questions on policy specifically?
I think we've veered pretty far off of policy at this point in this particular discussion. So I will, I don't have any further comments on policy. So I'll hold anything else I have to say.
To clarify, do we mean relay policy or protocol governance?
That is,
Okay.
Then I may need some clarification as to what the scope of policy we are discussing is at this point.
You were talking relay policy.
Yeah, but I was responding to what you had originally said. So policy never really happens.
Yeah, so
We can do that, though.
yeah, I mean, from a governance perspective, if we just to respond to some of that, I'll sort of I want to get some clarification actually as to what you were saying, where you were basically saying, you know, we don't know that this sort of UASF versus URSF versus UASF system versus abstaining completely. What were you trying to say when you were saying that this is like an option bool situation? Like, what's the point you were making?
Well, just that we haven't the situation in which that mental model is tested and verified through objectively verifiable, independent empirical evidence is when we go to activate the soft fork, and then also when mandatory signaling essentially rejects blocks that sort of make that chain more defensible according to the block time specified in the activation parameters.
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to sort of stress here is that, because you mentioned like this hasn't been verified, it's like, well, this isn't really something that can be verified. This is really a statement about Bitcoin's behavior as it relates to culture, and culture is sort of this constantly evolving thing. We know for a fact that it's actually sort of at the end of the day, it is the miners that decide what chain they're mining on. But what sort of everyone else decides to choose is Bitcoin, or even the ways in which they can provide incentives to miners. These are all things, these are all game theory and, you know, culture that play out in ways that may not even be repeatable, right? Depending on the time and the general thoughts of people interacting with the network at that time, these things can change, and these are sort of things that we get to decide how we want them to work, more as a collective, not as individuals, obviously. No one person can just sort of decide how the network's going to work, but we can sort of all think about what we would prefer it to work as, and I think that the network would do better if everyone were to take the time to think about that.
Well, I think it would even more so, it would be more a consequence of the fact that that it should be a reflective of empirically observable facts. And one of those things you can empirically verify and prove is whether it protects against PBAs, and how well does it do that?
I suppose that is an argument for why one might support it or not, but I suppose my position is that I'm not sure it matters, right? It's like whether BIP110 successfully solves the PBA problem or not, people have opinions about it. And whether or not it activates actually has nothing to do with whether or not it is successful at defending against the type of attack that it is trying to defend against.
Well, it depends on the kind of attack. If it takes your node offline for multiple 25 minutes, I mean, that's significant.
It is significant, but unless you're taking it as far as to say that a node that isn't running BIP110 is guaranteed to go fully offline, the other side, like if that's true, then perhaps you have an argument that the other side of the fork can't survive. But in almost any fork scenario, that's not going to be the case, right? The other side of the network may have trouble because of the attack that the fork is designed to protect against, but the likelihood that it does not continue to survive is very low, right? And so activation is ultimately down to what sort of people consider is two things. What do people consider is Bitcoin, and what do the miners mine on? What is the heaviest weight chain, right? And miners can choose to theoretically mine on anything, right? So ultimately, it is not actually the technically verifiable claims of the BIP that matter for activation as much as what the perception of those claims are.
For sure, I mean, it's all ultimately, at the end of the day, what I think is important to also consider, though, is that it's also important to also consider that that if people will change, there's a possibility people will change their minds based on new information, and if it does become abundantly obvious that PBAs are a serious problem, and they give an advantage to someone seeking to activate a protocol change on the network, then I think we're going to see very soon whether that dynamic does play and whether people are willing to change their minds based on new information.
Okay, yeah, and I do completely agree to that point, that in this specific case, it certainly thumbs the scales in a heavy way. I just was trying to refer to the larger conversation of governance in Bitcoin and how it works in general, that this specific aspect of it may not always apply.
Yeah, agreed.
Excellent. Do we feel like we've sufficiently wrapped up on policy? Any last comments on that? Yeah. They told me I was
governance rather than policy, but yeah.
There is still more on governance.
All right, Matt, why don't you?
That's funny. I was going to say one more thing.
Charlie, why don't you? Tidy up policy, then we'll move to governance.
When I first read 110, and this is probably going to come off naive, when I first read 110, I was like, oh yeah, interesting. I like how simple it is. And then I thought about spam rules in protocols, and the only other spam big protocol on the internet I could think of was SMTP, and I was kind of like, okay, they don't have spam rules. That was always, I have enough gray in my beard to remember when AOL started rolling that out on just keyword spam filtering. And these aren't, you can't compare these protocols directly, but I think my mind came to, it's so nuanced and so hard. So I think that's part of the problem we're having around agreement, and then back to governance now, is it's the core problem it's trying to solve takes away some features. Also, some people don't consider it spam, so it's just hard to get enough arms around it, enough hands to be waved to say this makes total sense.
Yes, it is difficult to define spam objectively because it is inherently subjective.
Yep.
Spam is something being forced upon you that you don't want.
And in this network, you have to pay to insert it.
Yeah, correct. And so if it just so happens, though, that what you define as spam, you're like, I don't want that thing and it's being forced on me, so I'm going to call it spam. If it just so happens that there emerges widespread supermajority consensus about that, then there also emerges naturally a network defense mechanism that does not eliminate the spam. It just imposes added effort and cost and risk onto the practice of that spam, which is all that's necessary in most cases, especially if there's hostility towards it. Cultural hostility is actually really important as well. That unless someone is an overt, shameless, infinite, deeply pocket and motivated attacker, you won't get that spam. And that doesn't fit the definition of most people. Most people, if there are signs at a park that's like, don't skateboard or everyone here will boo you until you leave, you know, and throw rocks at your feet, then most people won't go skateboarding in that park. Of course, they still could, it's still technically possible, but you will dramatically limit the instance rate. That's human psychology, that's human sociology, that's how we work. We are not assholes by design.
What has
Right.
the feedback been from the companies? And I don't know them all personally, but the companies and the people that do like these features. They like inscriptions, they like to 110.
So a lot of them are openly kind of, some of them are openly scams, right? They might not use the word scam, but they know exactly what they're doing. Some of them are legitimate technical efforts to do something clever that just devolve into a scam because there's no real market demand for it.
Would that be like wizard hats?
Yeah, but I would argue that they openly knew that they were running a scam. There's some people that are legitimately trying to like expand Bitcoin's capabilities and scalability and features in clever ways, but ultimately the only real demand for Bitcoin, sustainable, widespread, meaningful demand, is sound money. That is true. And I'm not saying that there can never be other demands on Bitcoin, but if it does that thing, it's enough, right? And so everything else should be, in my opinion, frowned upon, if not absolutely, you know, defended against, using any mechanism at our disposal that is not immediately harmful as well, right? Like you don't want to use a defense that actually hurts you. And then I do want to mention governance again, but
Yeah, there's also a point I'd like to make on that sort of the argument that some people have around inscriptions solving a problem in Bitcoin, the security budget problem, where they basically overpay for their storage costs up front in almost an absurd way when you compare them to what it would cost for Jeff Bezos to store your data for a month on Amazon S3. So people are aware, if you're willing to accept that there's only really one copy on your data and there's a certain SLA agreement with S3, they're going to charge you 3 cents per gigabyte month. And for that to kind of pay off, for you to, you know, prepay for your storage, while also, I mean, I don't know where you're going to run your node, your Ord index, probably also AWS, and it'll be even more expensive than putting it in an S3, I'll tell you what. But also, I mean, it would take probably about 1 million years for that to pay off. So whereas like you either bet, and by the way, that million-year assumption depends on two things not changing, which is Jeff Bezos' costs never go down, and also the Bitcoin price never goes up. And I don't know if that's a safe bet over a million-year timeline, but it just kind of gives you a sense of perspective for how absurdly uneconomical inscription data embedding is from first principles. Now, there might be an argument to be made that, oh, well, it's not sufficiently decentralized, for sure, but we could solve it in the way that Aiden described, which is we timestamp the data, and then we develop off-chain decentralized storage markets that solve the problem in better ways. And there's also, I don't know if there is a safe bet that we can sort of assume that the witness data on our node won't be pruned away in some clever way in the past. I don't think people have explored pruning on Bitcoin nodes to sufficient depth. Right now, just so people are aware, when you enable pruning on your node, it does what's called block file pruning. So it's not just the block itself. You have to wait for however many blocks are now marked in that wallet or that block.dat file. So it's 100 megabytes or so, 128 megabytes. You have to wait for all 128 megabytes to be marked as pruned before that file is then freed on your system. I think maybe a more clever way to dereplicate things that are undesirable on your node and free up storage for monetary transactions. And then if you ever do need, you know, the pruned data that you probably have zero interest in, but if you want to verify it locally, sure. But if you do want that sort of periodically and sort of in a way that you cannot source in bulk from the peer-to-peer network for free, then yeah, maybe you just pay a L402, you know, payment, cashew payment or whatever, for the very specific parts of the witness data that you need that would be otherwise elided and dereplicated on better developed node implementations.
Okay, so going back to governance a little bit, I want to lay out a couple of terms real quick that most in this room are probably just going to say, yeah, of course, but maybe a few of you won't, and definitely maybe some people watching this later will not, for sure. I want to observe a mistake in Bitcoin's past in naming that has led to a lot of confusion. The word fork, okay, means a changing of the rules. It does not mean a chain split. The word fork does not mean there are two chains where there used to be one. It's a bad name, okay? A soft fork just means changing the rules in a way that what was permissible yesterday might not be permissible today. You are tightening the rules of the network. A hard fork means that some things that you can do today were not permissible before. You are giving, we'll call it more freedom, even though I don't like that word.
It's not strictly a more versus less thing. A hard fork could simultaneously widen the rule set and tighten it. The point is that it's really just that a hard fork is everything that changes the network in a way that permits something that wasn't permitted yesterday, and a soft fork is everything else.
Okay, so when you hear the word fork, you should not think chain split. However, a hard fork will almost always, with one singular, almost impossible exception, will almost always result in a chain split. Okay, if you are hard forking, unless everyone agrees and comes along with you, which is impossible, okay, again, unless, yeah, but there was a chain split. Oh, you mean they do it now? Yeah, because it's a centralized governance model. So yes, you can hard fork all day long if you are a bank, a central organization, correct? Yeah, hard fork all you want.
As long as there's not a single miner who's still on the old chain.
So in Bitcoin, okay, it is practically guaranteed that if you do a hard fork, you are going to produce a chain split and two currencies, all right? If you do a soft fork, historically, it never results in a chain split, right? Is there a counterexample? Okay, so far, a soft fork has never resulted in a chain split, and there's been quite a few.
At least not one we know about.
I guess. There's like one person just out there mining on their own little chain. Yeah, so the idea here is that a soft fork can, in theory, produce a chain split, but historical precedent and game theory and a lot of the thinking that we do around this says that it won't. And okay, so that's just the terminology and a little bit of history that I wanted to put down. The reason for this, okay, we can dig into because it's quite nuanced and there's a lot of considerations, but the overarching reason for this is because when a soft fork activates, or there are various mechanisms for this, right? We've tried different ways of activating soft forks over the years. But when it comes time to activate the soft fork and the miners have to make a decision, ultimately the decision that they are making is, in the one hand, they can choose to mine transactions that every node on the network will accept and effectively prevent a chain split. They have that choice. The miners today are sitting there with the choice, the option, to keep the entire network intact. They have that ability. All they have to do is not mine certain transactions. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't do it. I'm just telling you that they have the choice. In this case, just signal, right? So it's not even the transactions at this point. At this point, to avoid a chain split, all the miners have to do is flip a bit in their header and continue to mine everything they were mining before. Ordinals, large op returns, you name it. They can avoid a chain split by their own decision. On the other hand, I'm just stating facts. I'm not stating an opinion at all. On the other hand, the miners can not flip that bit and effectively permit a chain split to take place. I won't say that they caused it because the initial decision of the nodes, right, was the we'll call it the instigating cause. It was the thing that set the wheels in motion, but that does not take away from the fact that today the miners collectively, and I'll take that even further and say that almost individually, depending on their size, have the ability to either prevent or allow a chain split to take place. And historically speaking, they have opted to not split the network. If they had the power to preserve the network, to preserve the entire economy and not carve off some piece of it, and in the process cause chaos, by the way, exchanges freezing, confusion about what Bitcoin is, lightning channels being stranded, people being Bitcoin, replay attacks, like just basically unleashing chaos on the network, they have the ability to prevent that. And so that's why soft forks tend to just activate, is because nobody wants to start setting off the bombs, right? Again, the nodes put this in motion, but the miners have the power to decide.
Well, what's interesting about that argument is that it's sort of, there's a couple things. So one is, there's the question of what is an economic node and its role in all of this. And then there's sort of the distinction there, and essentially nodes whose role is generating templates for the purpose of informing pooled hash rate, right? So mining pool template nodes and nodes that fall within the category of economic nodes are pretty important in this story, and it's important to sort of disambiguate and clarify some of those terms. So an economic node, there's multiple kinds. So an exchange is an obvious economic node where they essentially confirm that they received payment with their own node. And there's also mempool.space is another one. It's an index, an explorer, that users will confirm that they've been paid. The rules around the economic nodes are interesting here. Specifically also, another dynamic that's important to consider is that maybe economic nodes' roles will not be as prominent here because of something called BIP if you've heard of that. BIP is Portland Hodl and Wicked Smart Bitcoin's effort to essentially keep transactions in sync on either chain. So making sure, and I mean, there's other ways that nodes already do this anyway, but essentially making sure that so long as you're not trying to split the network, split the chain, double spend on one chain and not the other, so long as you're not trying to engage in such shenanigans, you're essentially, maybe there's a way that the chains could be kept in sync even if the histories diverge. And so that's going to be interesting to sort of see how that alters the game theory around economic nodes and their prominence in informing which mining pool operators choose to signal and support the changes. Additionally, it's also important to remember that nodes that do not actively signal for 110 are still compatible with 110 blocks. The opposite is not true after a certain point in time with 110.
So one framing I'd like to actually push back on a bit is this idea of economic nodes is like this binary state. Every node that a person uses to confirm their transactions or run their Lightning node against, any node that is used is an economic node. Yeah. Some have more economic power than others, but every single node that somebody uses has some economic power tied to the person and their economic activity within Bitcoin that uses that node. And so, and the reason that I want to stress that point is that there are a lot of people out there who are like, well, BIP110 has no support from any economic nodes, and that's fundamentally not true. Even if exchanges don't do that, there are individuals who are running this software. We know for a fact, at Start9, we know for a fact there are lots of people running this.
It's more individuals than the last.
Correct.
Yes. And these people have economic power. To say that they don't is absurd, even if they don't control large exchanges, even if they aren't moving a ton of money. The bottom line is that they are increasing the value of Bitcoin by engaging in it. And if they are to be removed from the network as a result of a chain split, that economic activity is now lost from Bitcoin. So anyway, so it's the only thing I wanted to push back against.
Economic value is also a broader term that does not just mean, frequency or size of sats moved through the node. So for example, a hodler who almost never transacts, but when they do transact, I feel like the most interesting man in the world. I don't always transact, but when I do, it's through my own node. You're still carrying enormous economic weight. Like, let's say you are a whale, right? And you are running your own node, but you rarely transact through it. That is still a massively economic node because the funds that it is ultimately verifying are large. And we can't know how much Bitcoin some of these plebs have, right? And so they could be much more economic than we can observe based on the activity going through their node.
Well, question for both of you is, if the same transaction is signed and transmitted and mined on either chain after activation, and there is essentially deviation in block history, but they do largely contain similar transactions, then does that sort of alter the game theory around economic nodes in there?
It certainly does, but it's not a long-term strategy towards like maintaining cohesion between the networks. Like ultimately, coins on each side will get tainted, regardless of what, like on the BIP110 side, it's very easy of like, all that needs to happen is, well, especially, not just post-activation, but like, not just post mandatory signaling, but post-activation, right, of the actual BIP. All you need is a transaction that violates the rules of BIP110, and then any descendant, any transaction that has ever interacted with that is now poisoned on the other chain. You can't just rebroadcast the transaction across both chains. But the more insidious one that people don't realize is that like every new block that gets mined has a Coinbase transaction. That Coinbase transaction is unique. It has like a unique block hash that it comes from. Any UTXO that is descended from one that has interacted with one is poisoned on the other chain. And so, like, as time goes on, it very, very quickly becomes possible to attack somebody by, sending them coins that their node will accept, but they don't realize are not valid on the other chain. So we don't want to necessarily tell people a story that, oh, it's fine. It doesn't matter what rules you run. The coins will be valid on both chains because the transaction's valid on both chains. We need to provide people the tools to actually verify that.
Couldn't that be resolved through just improved coin selection on the node, however?
Please clarify.
Well, so if, let's say, somebody sends you a UTXO that would be valid on the tainted chain but not on your node, really, like, in a way, I mean, I don't even know how you go to spend that if your application wallet, isn't even aware that it exists.
Yeah, for sure. It's more the other side of it that we're concerned about, where a user might, like, prefer a specific chain, but they aren't willing to sort of die on the hill, right? Where during this period of uncertainty, they need to choose a side. They're required fundamentally by the network to run certain consensus rules. But they don't know who's going to win yet, right? They don't want to be left holding the bag in the case that somebody pays them for something and the chain on which they get paid does not ultimately win. And you're right, for like if the soft fork is very short-lived, the probability of such an attack is very small because these Coinbase transactions that contain your coins are very rare, right? And perhaps that's enough. You're like, well, the chance of a prolonged contentious soft fork where neither side is sure who's going to win is almost nothing. Yeah. Maybe you're right, but it is a problem that I would like to see addressed.
Good point.
So I think it is almost nothing. I agree with that. Soft forks, again, I'll reiterate, are not designed to produce chain splits. And it doesn't necessarily mean, which in the past has been the case, that the miners just sort of go along with it because they are in a position to preserve the union and prevent chaos, and Tuesday becomes like Wednesday, right? Like if a couple medium-sized miners or even one large miner suddenly started signaling for BIP110, it would snowball instantly, and August 9th would come, BIP110 would have near universal signaling, and everyone would just wake up and go about their day. There would be no disruption in Bitcoin. There'd be some angry people, but the network would just keep going. There'd be no danger to anyone. Everything is just peace. They're in a position to do that. Almost every large miner unilaterally can make that decision right now, which is why some of us, including myself, has predicted it to happen. And again, making that prediction has caused me to obtain a label of like attacker of Bitcoin, but I'm just like, guys, that makes sense to me. That one large miner, is going to run the numbers and just be like, yeah, I can just cause everyone to keep living in peace. All I have to do is flip one switch and the network just moves on like it never happened, whatever. We can go back to fighting, and it's a one-year temporary thing anyway, so we can just go back to fighting about it next year, right? It's like kicking the can down the road is miners accepting a soft fork. It's sort of the default position, in my opinion, and has always been what they've done in the past. However, there is the alternate scenario, which we may see play out in a couple of days, which is that the miners do successfully kind of decide amongst themselves that nobody's going to signal, right? Or individually, they've all just decided like, yeah, I'm just not going to do that, and unless somebody else does, and then nobody does, so nobody does, right? It just sort of doesn't happen through apathy, through inertia. It just doesn't happen. In theory, it's possible. I do not, and I don't think hardly anyone is predicting a prolonged chain split. There will be a chain split, but nobody on the BIP110 side that I've ever heard wants to continue sort of mining on that chain, right? That's assuming they're actually mining, but even just nobody wants to be on that chain. That's not the point of the soft fork. It's not like the BIP110ers are getting together being like, we want to leave Bitcoin. They're like, no, we want to stay in Bitcoin. We just want to change the rules. So if they are unsuccessful in changing the rules, this is the big question mark about what happens next. What it sounds like in recent days or the week or so, it's pretty recent, at least in my observation, is that the most likely plan at this point, if BIP110 fails, will be an attempt to hard fork, to pivot to a hard fork that will definitely result in a chain split, but it will result in a chain split where the forking chain can mine blocks, can survive, right? See, the reason why a soft fork minority chain doesn't survive is because it doesn't have enough hash power to mine blocks. It could take years to get to the first difficulty adjustment. So it's not just that the people performing the soft fork have no desire to be on the minority chain. It's that they have no ability to be on the minority chain, okay? So the only thing that you can do at that point, if you are unwilling to quote, surrender and come back with your head hung low, if you are unwilling to do that, which I think could be the case for a lot of people in this scenario, because it's gotten, quite frankly, so bitter. Had the fighting not spilled over so aggressively into the personal attacks, I think there could have been a decent shot at reconciliation here. But it has gotten that far, and there is definitely an inhuman sort of labeling of the other side, an us versus them approach. And I find it hard to believe that if this BIP110 chain, dies on the launch pad, that everyone's just like, oh well, we'll just switch back to core and continue on. I don't know what they're going to do. I can't speak
to an
for
extent,
them.
the entire soft fork relies on the idea that that there are people who are willing to die on that hill, right? Yeah. That is the threat that they are providing to the miners.
Is that the miners are going to lose that portion of the
economy,
right. And the chaos.
And so some of them may be bluffing, but none of this works if some of them, unless some of them aren't. And I think it's very clear that many of them are not bluffing. But yes, when the hash power that you see is as low as it is right now, if the signaling doesn't just suddenly flip at the end, there's what are we at, like sub 1% signaling? 2.5% signaling. So it's not nothing, right? But we are looking at that point, what, one block every...
Forever.
day? Is that?
Totally unsustainable.
Yeah.
So in a world where it hard forks, we see a Bitcoin Cash again, kind of. Is anyone on the 110 side doing what Roger Ver did, going to the exchanges, saying you need to support this? I don't know if he was being positive or negative and being threatened. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
If this,
What do you think the chain will be called?
come on,
It can't
I'm
be
not in that
BIP110.
conversation,
Okay.
man. I have a good vantage point. I talk to a lot of people, but I'm not planning anything. I'm just doing my best to navigate. So
It'll be called Luke Dask Jr.'s Holy Bitcoin.
sure, okay. So it sounds like how this goes down, right? If the miners do choose to, quote, let the chain split and all the consequences that come along with that, then I believe that the BIP110 chain will pivot to a hard fork. There are two ways to ensure that your hard fork can move. One is just lowering the difficulty, right? Doing a difficulty adjustment right at the fork height. That's extremely dangerous because then you can be trivially attacked by
And the miners come over.
the other chain. Yeah. So if you want to ensure that your chain not only can mine blocks, but can mine blocks in peace, you also need to change the proof of work algorithm from SHA-256 to something else. And that ensures that your chain is relatively secure, assuming you've chosen, a hashing algorithm that is not widely and, abundant to like AI data centers or something like that. You'd have to choose something that, would be a slow grow. And in that sense, the fork, the new chain could be attractive in certain ways. Like if it had meaningful grassroots support and there were lots of people over there and mining on it was extremely doable, like from CPUs or GPUs at home, it could birth into a viable altcoin, not Bitcoin. It's not, I'm not saying it's going to take over Bitcoin. I'm just saying that if the people on the BIP110 side believe that the core side has lost the narrative, they've become captured or corrupt, or the miners are centralized and ruling the network, and they want to, they can hard fork into a viable, ongoing new cryptocurrency, and everyone on the other chain gets an airdrop, and you end up with a dividend, and miners, who knows how it plays out, but that is the only way that I see this really playing out. If the soft fork itself fails, because there's no reconciliation, right? And it's really a shame too, because what I was arguing earlier is that if we learned the game, if somebody proposed a soft fork and went out and campaigned for it and pushed for it and released a client and got everyone running the client and it got enough momentum to capture everyone's attention, and the other side was like, we know how to deal with this. We're going to release a client that invalidates your blocks and get other people to run it. Then it's like just a showdown. Somebody loses, and it's like, well, you won, we lost. It's like an election in any other political apparatus. There might be some bitterness out of the gate, but everyone stays together. But because there was no resistance, the resistance took place purely at the social level. It's like somebody trying to like race you, being like, let's see who's faster, and you being like, I'm not racing you, you're an idiot, screw off, I hate your mom. It's just like, if you just raced them, you either could have beat them or lost, but instead you insulted their mom, and now there's no reconciliation, and that's what happened. It's really a shame that Bitcoin is going to lose a limb in a few days. We just don't know which way yet.
It's a fair point, though. To steel man your argument, I've heard arguments made around action bias and how 110 is essentially, a consequence of people's tendency to want to do something to prevent something they don't like. And so action bias is one concern. Another is Brandolini's law. I think it's the exponential, or essentially like it is exponentially more difficult to disprove bullshit than to, prove that it's true. So in a way, like both of those arguments sort of at the social layer, sort of make Core's decision to ignore and censor people pointing out that there are vulnerabilities and concerns in consensus that essentially makes it maybe to some people more defensible.
I think, you know, if you work inside of a company and you want to build a product, you have to come up with the product, brand it well, know who your stakeholders are, sell them correctly. And it's not like BIP110 didn't sell correctly. It just had definitely has always had a little bit of an edge to it. I think the wiki, if you go to GitHub, the Wikimedia page for it, it says to send a clear message or something like that. So it's always felt a little bit like, I wonder, I don't know if you guys were talking economic nodes. I guess, do we consider Brian a stakeholder in this? Like, would it have been good if Brian liked Armstrong?
He would, yeah. He runs a very economic node.
Yeah. So, you know, I wonder why he never tweeted about this. Maybe it's because, you know, he's way more than just a Bitcoin company now or something like that, but I also wonder if it's a little bit of a marketing problem sometimes. So, yeah.
And we're about to move into Q&A here. And I know there's maybe some points we didn't cover, so we'll kind of give the opportunity to bring up any new points, or we can move to Q&A. We'll cover that in the Q&A. Any other last points from the panelists before? No. Yeah, Charlie?
No, okay, thanks.
I think it's important to have a few sort of tools in your mental toolbox. Three that are important that bear mentioning, I think, here are Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is probably the most likely. Two would be Hanlon's razor, which would be essentially never attribute that to malice, that which is adequately explained to stupidity. And then three, I would call this Hunter's razor, unless anybody else is deemed this not sufficiently original. Well, that's the irony, right? The irony of me introducing a razor, and a rhetorical razor, to be clear, would be essentially never assume competence, that, you know, unless you've been given a sufficient proof to the contrary. Never assume that people have fully thought out everything in a way that they've proven everything with no residual proofs needed. Just don't assume that. I think that's important to consider.
This is not a conversation about Cold Card.
the network. I just think that's a better option that solves the problem than, I don't know, just me just, yeah. So, yeah, yeah, just saying.
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately, what policy, serves when, like, limiting op return sizes and forcing people who want to conduct large op returns, into additional effort and cost and risk, and I think the risk piece is underappreciated, actually. So if you want to conduct a transaction that is malicious in nature, right, you are publishing like private information or horrific imagery, it's better if you can be identified, right? You should have to go to a miner directly, identify yourself, and submit this transaction, and that way there's somebody who's culpable, right? You can actually, but if the network is open and permissive to this, and you can trivially do it anonymously, you're basically guaranteeing that it's going to happen, which again, if a network is openly like, yeah, this is what we're here for, right? Like, we're not even trying to stop this stuff. Think of it like a bouncer at a bar, okay? And you're doing your best to keep out underage, patrons. And every once in a while, one sneaks through, and the police catch them and find out. It's like, you tried, but if you just remove the bouncer and you're just like, everyone's welcome, and you don't ID or anything like that, the bar's getting shut down. This is how governments work. Okay, so if Bitcoin just suddenly becomes a place where everything is permissible because nothing is spam and we welcome this stuff and it's easy to do and you can do it anonymously, it's going to happen. And I think it could serve as a casus belli for governments to step up the enforcement, so to speak. And that doesn't mean that Bitcoin dies. It doesn't mean it's over. It just means that we've welcomed an adversary that we don't need at this time, and we've deterred a crowd that we do want.
To be clear, there already is pretty objectionable data.
Correct, but we tried to stop it, and that's the point.
Well, yeah, there's OFAC non-compliant, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think. Yes, but I don't think anyone on the Bitcoin network is in agreement that we should try to censor transactions, monetary transactions.
Well, I mean, that same argument, though, would pass to both sides.
No, because there's nothing we can do. There is something that we can do to deter and minimize large, easily encoded and easily decoded imagery. Well, there is nothing we can do to deter OFAC non-compliant transactions. We just can't, right? So it's not without undue. What do you?
Just have the Bitcoin client download the SDN list.
Well, there's an undue burden type of argument too, right? There's a. I'm just saying, you one little thing. It's like just there's no reason to pick battles that not only nobody wants. Everyone on every side of this debate is like, ordinals are dumb. So why roll out the red carpet for them and invite for something you don't even want, while also alienating and preventing new people who would come in because of this perception? Potentially, I can't say for sure that would happen, while also inviting another reason to be attacked by authorities. It's just what's the win here?
It's a fair point. I wouldn't want to belabor it, but I do see some people in the audience kind of actively listening. If you have any questions to help us better seek truth.
Interesting thing about the fee market, and some people would disagree with me, is it's not what I would call a true market because you can't control price for the storage. And to change the 75% discount down to 50% discount would require a hard fork. So I think miners are kind of stuck in this zone of the fee market has always felt like a lightweight fee market to me. So I kind of wanted to push back on you.
Yeah, I think one of the motivating factors of, BIP110 and the people who support it is not that we have the solution. It's that we think a solution is important to discover and that we need a temporary patch and a reassertion of the will to discover it, right? Like, I think that if BIP110 literally just dies on the launch pad, falls flat, that the word spam will not come up again. It's over, right? Like,
I don't know. I feel like people are talking about it. No, seriously.
now they are. I'm just saying that
Yeah, and I'm
if
saying that- that's the
BIP110
beauty.
fails, with it goes any meaningful degree of will or ability to fight spam. It's like, I'm not saying
I
that
think it's
spam's then
educated
going to
a
run
lot
rampant.
of Bitcoiners.
It's a blow to the anti-spam movement, a huge one, which in turn, we don't know how things play out, could be a big blow to Bitcoin. And so BIP110, again, fairly benign in nature, especially because of its temporary nature, proposes to say, hey, this is a thing worthy of discussion. We are not ready to surrender this debate forever. Let's do this temporary thing so that we can continue the conversation and find a long-term solution. I just don't think that that's that crazy. The reason why it's perceived as being so crazy is quite literally because of the personalities promoting it. Like, that's ultimately what this comes down to, is just personal dislike for certain personalities. And I think that's kind of tragic that that's how this could fail.
I think that's right, but I'll go back to what I said earlier. I also think it's the first time we're deleting features. So I wouldn't use the word crazy with that, but I do think that that's harder.
All soft forks have constricted the consensus rules, but not necessarily like deleted features, right? But arguably, these features were not intended.
That is a fair
Right,
argument.
like these things were unintended features of SegWit and Taproot. And so it's more of a like, let's just remove the bugs, if you want to think of them that way. I'm not necessarily saying there are bugs, but they were not why we did SegWit and Taproot. Yeah. Because you are.
You can customize your mempool.
Do you want me to address that first, or do you want to add on to the question? Okay, and then I'll repeat it.
You're just talking about relay policy, and this, if you're not relaying spam, that maybe helps a touch, but you're still getting the miner who's going to put it in the block, and you're writing it to your ledger.
110 is a consensus change, by the way.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is that we could all restrict what's going to be relayed, and a miner's still going to put it in.
That is not necessarily true and has not been the historical precedent, right? So a couple of things. The first comment / question was, why do we need BIP110, and how does its failure mark a surrendering to spam when, at any given moment, anyone can run whatever implementation of Bitcoin they want that has any kind of policy that they want. I'll take it one step further, which is an argument that I made during the policy wars, was that even if no Bitcoin implementation offered any degree of policy or ability to filter transactions, even ones that are directly, like attacking a single node, like a denial of service against a single node, even if all of that was absent, nothing could possibly prevent the emergence of a service that sits in front of the Bitcoin node, right? Like instead of Electrum, which does, address indexing, you have a policy server that sits in front of the node, and
It's like a proxy. Of,
yeah. Does the transactions hit that thing?
That's the
It inspects. It is the solution.
That's what
and
we do
it's
on SMTP. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
That exists, by the way. That's called a QSIF, a core and tug soft fork, and it operates using essentially an enforcer daemon that uses the 0MQ and RPC APIs
Right.
to essentially enforce an alternative rule set on the node without any code changes. I built one, by the way. I'm one of the few who have.
So the argument is one, somebody's ability to filter transactions from their own mempool and refuse to relay them is undeniable. Nothing on earth and no one on earth can prevent you from doing that.